Are we good? Hello, everyone. Welcome to this lunch breakout session on equity in the arts, part one. How are artists advancing equity in youth? I will be moderating today's conversation, which will be with 4 brilliant people from the state of Texas that are here now. Fabiola Torralba from San Antonio. Ratcliffe is an artist and co-founder of Constituent Investment. Vivian Crockett, who is the Nancy, and Tim Halley, Assistant Curator of Contemporary Art at the Dallas Museum of Art. Schneider, an artist in Houston, Texas. Each artist will give a brief 2-minute introduction and then we'll start this conversation. So how about we start with Fabiola?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. And thank you to all of the other panelists for sharing this space with me, and to Daryl for inviting me to be a part of this. My name is Fabiola Ochoa Torralba. I'm calling from San Antonio, Texas, also known as Yanaguana to Payaya, Coahuiltec, and Sumisec people. I am an immigrant born in Guerrero, Mexico, raised in San Antonio. I'm a dance maker whose work is at the intersection of community engagement and decolonial practice. Right now, I'm trying to hold myself accountable to being responsive to the needs of my immediate local community. And I'm doing that through mutual aid, by supporting other artists, especially more marginalized artists around me, and also through my advocacy and housing justice work in the city. While I am working on specific art-related projects, I am also still actively engaged in some of these community-based efforts. Some of the dance projects or creative projects that I'm working on right now. One is called Nosotros Somos. It's a spin-off on a project that I did several years ago that really invites immigrants to share their first lived experiences in a performance-based method. This new rendition will focus on queer voices, queer migrant immigrant voices, and it's a project that's being funded through the MAP fund. I'm also working on the East to West project, which is a kind of platform for individuals to share their conocimiento, their knowledge, their work that is at the intersection of Afro descendant, Black, Indigenous, and Afro-Latinx peoples. And it's an effort to kind of continue that conversation and support solidarity efforts in Afro-Mexico. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Fabiola. Who wants to go next? Carrie?
Sure. So I'm Carrie Schneider. Let me share my screen real quick so you can see what I talk about. I'm coming to you from the unceded land of the Karankawa and the Carrizo-Comecrudo tribe of Texas. Y'all might know it as Houston. I work on survival creativity, and my most recent project has been about how, as Houstonians, we might be able to renegotiate our relationship to water post-Harvey and in the face of climate change. So what I've done is I've made this disco fish tank where people can choose symbolic objects. They pick a song, and for the length of their song, they make a waterscape. The camera is below the tank, and then it's projected large for everybody to see. It's done in a relay of mutual aid so that Houstonian strangers are helping one another kind of make these dreamscape renegotiations with our memories of water. I was hosting it in all of the city council districts as possible, and worked a lot on making it accessible for a range of bodies, heights, and just ideas in terms of how we can have new creative relationships to water, even though it's associated for a lot of us with trauma. I'm really interested in the role of arts, not only as healing, but as a way of making alternative possible futures and worlds. So this is my most recent project. Obviously, it reads a little bit different in the time of mass hand washing. But I've just been honored and humbled to get to work through this process and see a lot of creativity come from my city and the people inside of it. And I'm very happy to be here on this call. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Karen. What about Vivian?
Hi, everyone. My name is Vivian Crockett. I am currently a contemporary art curator at the Dallas Museum of Art, but I worked for the past 5 or so years as an independent curator and scholar for a number of arts organizations throughout New York. And I've also worked previously at the MoMA in New York, Whitney, and SF MoMA. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the curatorial goals and the kind of ethics that I try to center in my work. So I think a lot about making learning about modern and contemporary art an engaging and accessible experience as much as possible. And we can talk about different access needs and language barriers that come along with that. Really interested in addressing histories of exclusion in our telling of art histories, exploring historical legacies, how contemporary artists are both kind of building on, but also disrupting and interrogating pre-existing discourses, and wanting to make historical shows that feel still dynamic and relevant and help us understand our present by looking and reflecting on the past. And I think most importantly, one of the things that I value the most about the work that I get to do is to support emerging and early career artists and to be a bridge between artists and the various institutions that I've been engaged with and worked within. So I'm excited to talk about with everyone. I think there's lots to get into. Hopefully we'll cover some good ground in the next 40 minutes or so.
Thank you, Vivian. Daryl?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ratcliffe. I'm an artist and a poet based in Dallas, Texas. Also a co-founder of Ash Studios with Fred Villanueva since 2012, a Black and white space. But this year, in March, I launched a new company with my co-founder, Maya Crawford, and we named our company Giusepian Investments. And Giusepian is an old Latin word for cotton. Being in Dallas, Texas, a city built on stolen land, namely that of the Caddo and Wichita, and built by stolen labor. Dallas was the largest inland port for cotton in the United States, and the production and trade of cotton established a modern global economy and cemented the United States' place in it. And I thought, what a better metaphor for reclaiming what was always ours, what we literally built and worked for, what connects us and is resonant all over the world, than to name the company founded by descendants of slaves in the South after cotton. Giusepian's mission is to evolve the role of culture in society. And this is because culture transmits ideas. Culture is what spread the idea of white supremacy. So it's up to culture to spread a new idea, one of anti-racism. It's up to culture to spread the idea of reparations, and culture is created by artists and artists lead. We are leading at Giusepian by supporting artists through artist management and supporting our communities through cultural consulting, PR, real estate development, and cultural investments.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Daryl. You kind of cut off. You had a little bit of glitches. Maybe I'm going to start this conversation. Maybe you want to repeat the first part around Giusepian Investments, because I got cut off and I don't know if the public was able to hear it. So if you can give us a brief
about the meaning of the name, is that where it cut off?
Yes.
Okay. All right, great. So Giusepian is a Latin word that means cotton. And so it was, I think as an artist, it was both like a metaphorical and aspirational name, and really centered in this idea of how do we kind of reclaim all that we have already built and given this country and the world.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Well, first, I'm so excited to be here with all of you. I am Sophia Bastidas Vivar. I am the SMU Meadows Curatorial Fellow. And my work also is around both environmental injustices and racial injustices. The gallery, I hope to create a space for students and the community to always be around, and it's accessible, and that we can reach out to the most marginalized communities. So in that case, I'm here with you on that. But with that said, I want to talk about what does it mean when we're thinking about power and inequities in the arts. What is the power that has to be let go of, and when do we have to step down of that power to allow for other people that are not being heard to be part of the conversation? And this is something that we're doing, but how can we see it continuing in our city and in other fields within the city? Because in art, we are kind of at the forefront of many of these issues, and we're guiding those conversations, and it's interesting to see how we've been creating those spaces. So maybe if everybody can share a little bit about how they're doing it in their own work, would be great. Who wants to start? Maybe Daryl?
Wow, well, sure. Just checking, making sure is my audio okay before I start rambling. All right, we're good. So, how is equity showing up in the work? Is that the summary?
Well, and kind of the power, when we have to step out of power, and when do we have to acknowledge that people have too much power and they have to just step away from it to let other people get into that power?
Sure. So I think there's a couple things going on. One, for me right now, is as an artist, as a cultural maker, as a community member, acknowledging and claiming and reclaiming the power that already exists inside of us and our communities, I think is kind of a first step, because I think it's very easy and almost natural, and in a way, this is what we're taught, to look at other people, to look at white communities in particular on as like sources of inspiration, when we have our own selves and lineages and ancestors to look to for sources of inspiration. And then two, in this movement, is also leading the charge and being very clear that part of this conversation about equity does involve people who have traditionally had power in this country giving their power away and stepping away. And in a way, I've been thinking a lot about trust, about how even in structures that are that have good intentions, there isn't often enough trust given to BIPOC people and women to say, hey, here is my money, here is the seat that I had, take it and do what you will with it. And I think that is kind of the power exchange that I think I'm most interested in right now.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think there have been recent instances where I've, called in on some friends who I think everyone is really struggling in terms of accessing work. And I think there's a scarcity feeling in the air, but sometimes I get approached about writing something or weighing in on something or being in conversation. And I say, I'm actually not the appropriate person to have this conversation. You should speak to so-and-so. And understanding that we're part of a kind of a larger ecosystem, and hopefully we're supporting each other and amplifying each other's voices and redirecting some of these opportunities to other people when it feels appropriate to do so. So I've asked friends sometimes, I'm like, do you really think you should be the one doing this? Like, is there someone else who could be having a platform to speak that otherwise might not be able to? So that's something I definitely think about. I think I'm in a different position slightly as a curator because I am a little bit the wizard behind the curtain. And I think a lot about labor extraction of my own work. Like I put in a lot of work into things. And then at the end of the day, you know, it's the institutions that I work for that get credited for being, you know, really thoughtful and being cutting edge or being whatever else. And the kind of the curatorial work, including our own kinds of biases and preferences, I think get taken out of people's understanding. I think people go to a museum and they just see what's on the wall and they don't understand that they're actual people who make that work possible, including my colleagues who I also work with who don't get the curatorial credit, right? So I think it's always kind of reaffirming the work that goes behind these things that you see as a finished product. There's a long kind of history of exchange and hopefully long-term sustained trust that is built with the artists that I work with beyond specific projects that people can point to.
Fabiola, Carrie, what about you in your work?
Fabiola, do you want to start or do you want me to go? Okay, so yeah, it's the ideas of move forward or move back or step up or step down. Obviously, I am in the subject position of a white Southern woman, and there are a lot of white ladies in the arts, and they've done a lot of things that are not the best things to do as a sort of model of art missionaries. And we know how well that has not gone. I've been really so fortunate to have been under the mentorship of Project Row Houses for about 10 years. So them as a model of community engagement, especially at a time when socially engaged art or social practice has become really popular. It's kind of the ism of our time. I'm just grateful that I've been in a position where, one, it's not like you should ever speak on behalf of somebody, you know, you should always just pass the mic. And then two, although I've done a lot of work like what Vivian's echoing on the curatorial side, organizing for artists to get paid and for our labor to be compensated, not just extracted or, you know, used as surplus value for some other cause. At the same time, as an artist who is, for example, invited on this call or who has a CD with art institutions on them, I'm always trying to make sure that my projects reflect the fact that there's already always artists in every community. They may not be sort of, you know, capital A artists, but they're there. They're making new meaning. They're making culture. Everyone knows who they are. They have a role, and trying to make sure that they also get the resources and platforms, not just that it sort of travels in these whirlpools of the industry. Yeah. Oh, and then in Washing Water, the attempt was, you know, being involved in the cultural planning process for Houston and hearing a lot of people say, why is there only art in this one district? Why isn't there access to this in my neighborhood? The decision was to make this project be able to travel and to do some purposive sampling. So I wasn't gonna, I mean, COVID kind of made me have to put a pause, but not quitting until I had a sample of interactants and participants who are representationally just in terms of Houston's actual population. So, you know, if there's this percentage of people under 18, I should have at least that percentage of people who've interacted with the project, as if I'm saying that this is reflective of our voice and experience. So yeah, trying to have a kind of rigor, trying to be humble and learn from my teachers who know better than me.
Hey, I love what's been brought up already, and I really kind of relate to what Dara was sharing about honoring the local assets of your community. I was trained, I guess, as a cultural worker, and also kind of politically trained with the understanding that all of the tools that we need, all that we need to know and to prosper we already have. It already exists. We have this knowledge, this understanding, and these ways that have been passed down to us and that we have inherited and also have cultivated ourselves. And so I don't see the need to go out, to look out, or to speak up. I think understanding the racial and the economic and the gender dynamics of the society that we live in, and also recognizing the privilege that I have, see myself as somebody who is responsible for accessing power and redistributing power, more than I speak to power and try to influence them or encourage them to include us in their processes. I think I'm supposed to do a little bit of that still, and I do that in my own advocacy, as I am now coming to understand that I am no longer in the same position that I was before. I have more privilege because I can speak English, I can read, I can write, I can articulate my ideas in ways that sound appeasing and intelligible to dominant culture. I can code switch. I have papers, MFA, institutional backings, all of that. And so I feel like my responsibility to access and redistribute is also about translating on all ends, really centering the positioning of more marginalized than me people, and communicating what the assets of those communities and those experiences are to folks who don't come from those backgrounds. I like to think of, I think what I've learned a lot from the queer feminist women of color, Black women specifically of the US, is this idea that we all have power. I think we get taught to think that power is something that we pursue, that we work our way up to. I think in popular education, popular movement building, autonomous movement building, especially of Latino America, there's this assumption that we all have power together. We can all generate power and energy, and that is our life force and our voice, and what champions our histories. But I think that we can't always spend time speaking up to, that it's about speaking with. And I really try to make sure that as I'm like moving into different aspects of society and into different spaces, tables, and places that I wouldn't have had access to before, that I am continuing to humble myself to be in relation and be in dialogue with those who aren't sitting at the table. And that's what I do to hold myself accountable and to always bring those issues in to the spaces that I'm a part of, and to think of those that I bring with me, that I don't stand alone.
I think that that's so beautiful. I also love what Daryl said in relationship to this idea of trust, and people that are empowered, that have the capacity to trust. How are we building that trust, both with the communities that we work with and in the communities that have that power to allow for things and the change to happen? So often we continue to see the same type of projects, the same type of movements around big piles of money. We've seen a difference with Gossipian investments, for example. That's, I think that a lot of institutions have moved and said, hey, there is this group of artists that have organized in this way that are creating space and like visibilizing the work of certain artists. And so just calling out and calling attention in a way that the institutions are responsible and say, okay, this is the organization or the collective of people that I have to ask for because they have been doing the work. So if Daryl, you can speak a little bit about that relationship within Gossipian and the kind of trust building that happened there, because it has taken you years. It didn't came out of, this year.
That's definitely true. I would jokingly say that perhaps I was the city twice before
you're having maybe if you're cutting off a little bit, so I don't know if it's
I'm cutting off. Am I still cutting off?
Okay, go ahead. If I raise my hand, you're cutting off, okay?
Okay. All right. So I like to think I was cutting off because maybe I was saying something a little inappropriate. No, I was saying that.
Maybe take your video out.
Okay. Let's stop.
Okay.
Hello. Better, worse, same.
No, better.
Better. Okay. So anyway, to get back to your question, it has been a long road, and I think there's been an intentional, I think, relationship building since at least 2013. So over the last 7 years of building relationships with institutions and with folks in power in Dallas. And that hasn't always been pleasant or easy. There's been moments of fillings on, I'm sure, both sides as we pursue equity, because there's definitely like a humbleness in the work of, like, I'm not perfect, and neither are the people and institutions I'm dealing with. So we're all going to make mistakes. What I do appreciate now that it's been a longer length of time doing this work is the sense of being in community with someone, is that like they aren't going away and you aren't going away. And so like at some point you'll have to kind of figure out how to best live with each other. And I think that is actually sort of a beautiful, contentious process. And I'm so thankful, because like there are more and more people, I will say, particularly for Dallas and North Texas in general, is that every year it feels like there are more people who are committed to doing this type of work, more people who brought in, and so whereas the work used to be very lonely, the work is far less lonely now. And for me, that's an exciting thing. And I think that's something that those who do have power, who do have resources, are noticing that trend. And I think that also makes them more likely and willing to trust, because there is power in numbers, there's power in community.
Yeah, totally. And I think that also one of the conversations that has been leading that type of work that you've been doing is the kind of payment to artists, paying artists, honoring the artist assets that you have in your community. And I know, Carrie, you've been doing some of that work. So if you can speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, so, oh my gosh, the thing about it being less lonely, years ago, when my co-organizer Jenny Ash and I were organizing to get artists paid to have a conference of how, one, we have our own models of sustainability, like Fabiola is saying, like, you don't have to always look outside for how you should be doing it. So we convened artists. We also invited, policymakers, admins, people in the infrastructure, but it was artist created. And that first year we were told, like, watch your back. You're never going to work in this town again if you ask for money. And like, now it's amazing, because the current crop of people that are trying to make the Houston Arts Alliance act right is much bigger, much smarter, much more organized than we were. But in the meantime, one thing that I think that we, with all of our amazing mentors and collaborators, help change is that Houston Arts Alliance now gives bigger grant amounts for organizations that have a line item for paying artist fees. And the culture in the city has really shifted a lot. I wanted to share one anecdote from the previous conversation, which is that I don't know if in your own cities you've gone through this creative placemaking nonsense, but when it was happening in Houston, I just remember this meeting with HAA where we brought in Kenny Bailey from the Design Studio for Social Intervention, who's a big hero of mine. because we as artists had to organize against a creative placemaking project, feeling that we were instrumentalized so that we could also help the residents of this neighborhood who felt like they were being consumed. We were in the same boat together, both being like, this is not what we want, you know? But I remember they kept asking the same question like 11 times, which was, after we go into a neighborhood and we do our art project, what do we do to make the people that are really angry be quiet? And Kenny just kept saying, first of all, don't go where you're not invited, and always work with the existing community leaders, figure out what they need and funnel the resources there. And then somebody would be like, yeah, but what about after when they're mad? What can we like run a PR campaign? And he was just like, don't go where you're not invited, and work with the existing leaders and funnel resources to them. And I still think that's the answer. And I also think it's the answer, like, in terms of trust and the issue of artists specifically. Like, institutions just need to give money to the artists and trust them that they know what to do. So those are my 2 cents.
I think that it also in terms of solidarity, for me, for instance, is also a way, you know, when people ask me to do something for free, and it's not that I would do it for free because maybe I have the resources to do it for free, but it's not about that, because when I do it for free, I am devaluing other people's work. And so that's why it's important, you know, I feel that it's very important that we do not devalue other people's work, and we hold ourselves accountable to making sure that artists are being paid in whatever position they are, at whatever capacity it is.
Because if we accept no fee, then that makes for an art world where only people who can afford to work for free are represented.
Exactly. Yeah. How does that working in fees has been at the museum level, Vivian, or, you know, working with museums like the MoMA or the Whitney, or even with the DMA today? Like, what has been the kind of discourse and fight that has been going on, or have they already have the conditions to be doing this work and paying artists?
I'm not sure how to answer that question. I think the pandemic has brought up a lot of complications. I think a lot of budgets are frozen in a lot of different ways. And the DMA is distinct, I think, from places like MoMA and the Whitney. I think, you know, I'm grateful to be working for an institution where no staff has been furloughed or laid off, which is sadly really rare in the art world and in museums right now. And so I think I would have felt, you know, I've only made a couple of acquisitions given the current conditions at the museum, but I feel very, very happy that my first 2 acquisitions for the museum were of local artists. I think that's really, really important and something that should be centered. I mean, I've struggled with that working independently for a long time. Like, now I have an institutional job, but, you know, this conversation around trust and building relationships, a lot of that has been out of the necessity of kind of having long-term networks of support and knowing that other people are going to have my back. But I still get asks. Like, I got an email yesterday asking me to do something with a tight deadline, right? During a pandemic, like, people emailing you to do something within 2 weeks, and then they mention no fee and you have to be the one to ask, and you look supposedly crass for asking about payment. But if you're not going to be able to pay people, make that known, like, be transparent from the beginning. And there are instances where I will happily support an organization or whatever institutional framework where it's clear, like, they just can't afford it. Like, there are instances where that feels okay. But I think, yeah, being really clear about that, like, just being really transparent about that process. So I'm not sure that I answered your question, but
I have a question. I've been thinking a lot about kind of working outside of traditional art worlds, because, like, from a power standpoint and also from a capital standpoint, you know, kind of the traditional, even like the museum worlds and gallery worlds, those art worlds are a small fraction of, like, the larger world of capital and power in a city. And so I know that all of you work, like, outside of those roles, and I wanted to see like what you've learned from doing that, um, and what value do you see in like working like in the world of politics or community or organizing community help for.
You kind of cut off, but if I understand, your question is what has been our experience working outside of the art world and kind of engaging with bigger networks of capital outside of the traditional arts world market?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody? I think that, you know, it is a complicated move to do around it, because outside of, you know, imagine if within the art world market there is still a sense of like artists need to get paid. Maybe you might do it or not do it, and maybe you have the kind of, okay, this is a great institution that I would work for very little, but I am interested in working with these people, so you leverage certain things. But sometimes I find it that outside of the art world, engaging with other places is even harder, because there is an understanding of like they don't understand the idea of an artist fee, for instance, or the idea of that the artist labor. And so, you know, it's just this it's a more complicated negotiation, even though they have more money. But I think that you just, in a way, I've had to put things in just maybe more of a commercial terms, that they are like, okay, maybe this is more in the kind of design world where you're like, okay, this painting is this amount of money, you know, right? Because talking about artist fees, or like kind of building up that network or community of like saying, oh, you know, the artist works and you have to pay them for this amount for these hours, or just the idea itself, it's very hard for them to understand. So it's better to like use also kind of capital or market terms that are, you know, these people are more familiar with, or, you know, or just also have the kind of energy and campaign capacity to educate. But that's also very tiring. I don't know how everyone else has felt about that, but I happen to have to negotiate those things within SMU, Meadow School of the Arts, because we have certain people that come and say, oh, can we have this student works? We'll put them in our offices. And I'm like, well, artist fees. And then, you know, you just have to you know, it's hard for them to understand. They're like, yes, but they're showing their work. It's amazing. And it's an amazing opportunity. And it's like, yes, but they, you know, they don't even have the time or money to go and hang it. Right? So it's just communicating that in terms that both parties, you know, get into an agreement.
It's like you can't go to the grocery store and buy groceries with your exposure card. Like, oh, don't worry, I have 150 exposure points on this card, so I'm able to access my basic living needs because, you know, my art is hanging over here. I think it's like the understanding that our work, yeah, deserves to be paid for.
I can share a little bit on that if that's cool. Right now I'm working with some folks within the municipal government, folks who manage economic development projects across the country, along with community-based folks working on housing justice issues. And it's really interesting to work with folks with power who don't come from a creative background or interdisciplinary studies kind of background. And what I see is that there's this, at least in the people that I'm interacting with, that are very focused on things like development, operational management, you know, directing programs, is that there's a resistance to try new things, a resistance to take risks. It's very hard for folks sometimes to allow themselves to imagine. And it's the brain seems to go to, this is what we can do, these are the standards, these are the protocols, and how do we work within this system that we're a part of. And that's new for me to understand as somebody who grew up undocumented, grew up working class, and grew up very much having to kind of till my soil, right, to plant the seeds that the people around me were planting for me in hopes that they would bloom during my time on this earth, is that cultivation from the base, to me really helps to facilitate imaginings about what is possible with what you have, what is possible without these like institutions, with these hierarchies, without these structures that support a lot of people, but obviously not everybody has access to. And I'm very grateful for that because, you know, I grew up with a mother, you know, who really hustled, you know, sold, from home interior catalogs, sold jewelry at the flea market, would sell reused furniture that she would find on the streets, would make crafts and sell them, you know, to her neighbors, had plant stands along the side of the road, cleans houses to this day, and is is a successful small business owner. But this idea that we make what we need, we generate what with what we have, I think is something that a lot of folks that are outside of these systems have the capacity to do, because it's what we've always had to do. And I miss that kind of creative ingenuity in some of these more professional, institutionalized spaces. It really, you know, hurts me that it's difficult for people to reimagine outside of those boundaries. Hurts me especially because we live in one of the most richest countries in the world. I think in many ways, I do feel like there are many things that are not impossible here. And it's because we have wealth. And so sometimes as an artist, I'm like, wow, like if you don't know how to do it, that's cool. If you don't have the confidence or the skill set or the networks, that's cool. But give it to those like that know how to do that work. Give it to the people that are willing to do that kind of on the grounds cultivation. And that's what I would desire from other folks in power, to just let people do their work. And when we're fearful or when we don't know, you know, trust, let others lead, you know, just believe us that we know things.
I feel like I had a different take on Daryl's question, which is like, you know, I grew up in a rural conservative Texas town, and I didn't know anything about like the art sphere. I just did what I did, and I've had a blast like working with architects or urban planners or politicians, or with the washing water. It would be like, you know, we don't need to do this on the side of a museum. We need to do this like on the Harvey anniversary at a public park, or like at this other place that's at an elementary school. It's like what we are, the role that we have as like culture makers is important for everybody. I mean, I think there should be art, like this is Daryl, you should answer this question, right? That there should be an artist like with a seat at the table, and like I'm not going to take your words. You're like the one that inspired me about it, but yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, there definitely should be an artist, you know, in every.
Daryl, your sound is not good. Maybe you can take the video and see.
Okay. Well, keep going. I'm gonna.
Well, we have a question from the audience that says, what can we do to ensure that artists are woven into the fabric of each community at the outset without it being seen as an add-on? Well, I think that, you know, in a way, artists, that ingenuity that Fabiola was talking about, and that kind of informal way of making things, are often the the ones that come up with the better solutions and the ones that really innovate in precarious situations. And I think that there are many, there are cities and communities that artists should, there we should create positions for them, or even within our own city in Dallas, is like, how many artists are working at the Office of Cultural Affairs? How many working artists that have been doing the work forever in this city are working there? And seeing that, because those are jobs that we're already doing, and so, like, how is the city also looking at that and saying, these are the artists that have been here, they have been doing the work? I don't know, Daryl. You help me here.
I'm gonna try one more time. I refresh. Is my audio? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. So yeah, and I would just add to that, how many artists are being hired by like the hospital system? How many artists are being hired by like the Fortune 100 companies that are based in the DFW? Like, there's the role, at least in my vision, the role of the artist in society is expansive. It permeates every bit of it. I feel like every board for for-profit companies should have there should be an artist on your board. There should be an artist, in faith institutions. There should be basically artists everywhere, because artists are problem solvers, and artists are used to dealing in and wading through complexity. And the problems that our communities face throughout Texas, and I think across the country and world, are really complex problems that aren't going to be solved by linear thinking. And so I think the folks who are trained and navigating and thriving and building from complexity are most needed right now in our society.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Daryl, for that. I think our time is over. I want to thank all of you for being here, for sharing all of your insight, your knowledge, your presence. I feel very honored to have gotten to meet you through these. Some I've met more, but I hope that we continue to build on this conversation, keep ourselves connected, and please share everything that you're doing so we can continue doing the work and supporting each other. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for guiding our conversation today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your work.
Bye-bye.
Bye.